Welcome to your Daily Detroit for Friday, August 28th, 2020. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. You know, the world is in a serious place right now, a troubled place. Ordinarily, we would send you out on a Friday with some lighthearted fare, perhaps a new restaurant opening, cocktails, or something to help you forget the larger problems in the world. But today did not feel like the right time to do that.
No, it didn't. The state of Michigan on Friday reported a dubious milestone as we've now passed the 100,000 mark on confirmed COVID-19 cases. Also, the events of the past week in Kenosha, Wisconsin, involving the police shooting of a black man who was leaning into his car while his children were inside, continue to reverberate well beyond the world of social justice. Detroit City FC now says it will not play Saturday's match at the New York Cosmos out of solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. We bring in Fletcher Sharpe to talk all about it.
But first, Dr. Paul Thomas joins us from Plum Health Direct Primary Care to put the coronavirus milestone in context.
But before all of that, a quick note to remember to become a member. Remember to become a member at patreon.com/dailydetroit. It's critical to pushing Detroit's conversation forward and supporting fact-based, rational, and 100% QAnon-free conversation. No fake news here. Also, our bourbon glass tier is about to be released. Remember that link, patreon.com/dailydetroit. Now on to the show.
Well, today is an infamous day in Michigan history as we have now crossed 100,000 confirmed coronavirus cases. In fact, the exact number is 100,699. That's due to an additional 741 cases reported Friday afternoon. That pairs with 6 additional deaths, bringing the total throughout the pandemic to 6,446 souls lost. So often we just kind of talk about the numbers and a couple top line things, but today, considering the situation, we thought it important to bring on Dr. Paul Thomas from Plum Health. Give us some context. Dr. Paul, it's good to hear from you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So, these are just some staggering numbers. As many people have been infected with this virus as could almost fill the U of M big house in Ann Arbor. You've got thousands of people who have perished. It can kind of be head spinning for folks. Put this in context compared to previous years.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the leading causes of death in the state of Michigan, over the years, you're looking at the two biggest ones are heart disease and cancer. Heart disease kills about 25,000 Michigan residents every year. Cancer kills about 20,000 Michigan residents every year. And then beyond that, you get into lower respiratory disease, accidents, strokes, diabetes, flu, suicide, etc. And unfortunately, this year, with coronavirus killing 6,446 Michiganders, will likely be the third leading cause of death in the state of Michigan this year, which is staggering. It's surpassed chronic lower respiratory disease, that's like COPD, accidents, strokes, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, kidney disease. It surpasses all of those. And it's really a sad day. I think one of the frustrating things that has been brought up by this presidential administration is that, well, if we close the economy, then people are going to lose jobs and folks are going to commit suicide or have drug overdoses. And if you take that into account, if you look what happened last year, there were 1,138 firearm deaths and 2,600 drug overdose deaths, and then 1,457 suicides. So all of those combined are still less than the people who've died from coronavirus this year. And so I think it's a false equivalence, and I think that people really need to understand the scope of this pandemic and how many people have died from this.
Yeah, and we're only 5 months into it, not even a full year, with 741 new cases. Jared, it seems like that's maybe on the low end of the new daily caseloads that the state has been reporting this week far too high when we're 5 months in, and only a month or so ago we appeared to have flattened the curve. Dr. Paul, you practice primary care, and I know we have talked about it before that you have seen patients who did test positive for coronavirus. Can you give us an anecdote of what you've seen among people who ended up testing positive and what they're experiencing and why people should sort of take this seriously? Because it's clear that a lot of people just simply aren't taking it seriously.
Yeah, I think part of it is that you don't know what it's going to do to you because there are so many different variations in how it affects you. And it comes down to the amount of virus that you come into contact with, and then also your comorbidities. Do you have diabetes and high blood pressure? Do you have heart disease? Or if you have asthma or COPD, your chances of surviving are much lower than if you have more or less like a clean slate. So if you have been weakened by other conditions, you're more likely to die from COVID and coronavirus. And so, we've seen a really wide range. We've seen folks who have tested positive who had mild symptoms. We've seen people who have tested positive who have been ill for about a week, something equivalent to the flu. We've had patients who have been sick for 2 months who have tested positive, who've had lingering cough, shortness of breath, muscle weakness for up to 2 months, which was significant. And then we've also, unfortunately, had a patient who died from this, who's passed away. And these are very real things. We take care of Detroiters, and we all know that folks in Detroit have been hit hard by this pandemic. 1,500 Detroiters have died from coronavirus, and it's just a staggering number. I know there's a memorial coming up hosted by the city of Detroit on Belle Isle to memorialize folks, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how they do that. There are so many people who've been affected by this.
I have a question that I'm kind of passing on from a lot of listeners or people who send us email comments. There tends to be this belief out there that everything's being labeled COVID. It's like there's this peppering of the same objections every time we present facts about COVID. And I wanted you, if you have any insight on that, this whole idea that, well, it's everything that's being labeled COVID and more people aren't really dying, that kind of thing. Do you have kind of any insight on that?
Obviously, they can only categorize somebody as passing away from COVID-19 if they test positive. And so I think there is going to be a large increase of people who've died from COVID, separate from the other data points from other conditions like we mentioned earlier, heart disease, cancer, COPD, etc. Might COVID have killed a few people who may have died from COPD anyways? It's possible, but I think that the hospitals and the physicians are doing an excellent job of keeping track of this and recording this. There's going to be some time that has to pass before we can sort this all out. Maybe we can look at the 2020 data in cumulative form, mid-2021, and we can get a clearer idea. But in my opinion, from what I've seen, from the patients that I've taken care of, and from my colleagues who've told me stories in the hospital, these are real patients who are dying from coronavirus, often younger folks who might have had diabetes or had high blood pressure, but who should have lived through a normal flu infection or something like that. But COVID is just a different animal. It's a different sort of virus, and it's more deadly and more dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Paul, do you see anything out there that gives you hope that better days are coming or that we might be able to get a handle on this, or frankly not?
I think a big hope is that the virus may have a vaccine coming up here shortly. And we're hoping that this comes out early 2021, mid 2021, because if you look at our cumulative data in the state of Michigan, we had a really big peak at the beginning of April, end of March, and that tapered slowly through the end of June. But then we've had this spike, and it's kind of plateaued in July and August, and it doesn't seem like we're doing any better. And I think there's a couple different things at play where people are fatigued from this because we didn't fully address it. We didn't fully get a handle on it, and people are trying to go out and about and live their lives, and they're tired of wearing the masks and having the restrictions. So I think psychologically people are just tired of dealing with this, but unfortunately the virus is still present and still circulating in our communities and causing illnesses and deaths, as our data shows. So I'm hopeful that the vaccine will come out, but I'm also hopeful that collective action could come to play once we see that this is continuing and persisting.
You know, as we head into the weekend here to kind of wrap up, you talk about that collective action. What is the collective action that we all, as Daily Detroit listeners, as citizens of our community, what's the collective action that we could all do so we can feel like we can do something about this ourselves and not have to necessarily rely on other people? Because right now it seems like relying on levels of government, other things, it doesn't feel like we have backup right now.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. But, what you can do is wear the mask, wash your hands, only go out for those necessary trips, and try to avoid too much social interaction. Keep your groups to fewer than 10 people. That's the best that you can do as an individual. And hopefully the message is spread to other people in the community that are not doing those things, and we can get a handle on this faster.
All right. Well, Dr. Paul Thomas, Plum Health, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on, guys, and good luck out there.
Thanks, Doc.
Sports around the nation is taking a pause due to injustice, and right here in Detroit as well. To talk about that, Fletcher Sharpe.
Thanks for having me for this.
Of course.
Fletcher, the Detroit Lions we talked about on a previous show were among the first teams to kind of step up on this whole issue of, the social justice protests roiling the country, canceling a practice. Since then, the NBA and Major League Baseball games have been canceled. I mean, some people are calling it a boycott. I think others are probably more accurately calling it sort of a strike. It is, after all, sort of more close to a labor strike. The Detroit Tigers declined to play their most recent game. And now the latest is Detroit City FC. They canceled Saturday's game at the New York Cosmos. And I'm just going to read their 4-sentence statement and kind of let you muse on it. City released this statement Thursday night, quote, "In response to the shooting of Jacob Blake and the continued devaluation of Black lives, the players of Detroit City FC have made the decision to not play Saturday's match against the New York Cosmos. The DCFC organization wholeheartedly supports this decision. The need to address social injustice and racism supersedes sports at this moment. In lieu of the match at the New York Cosmos, Detroit City FC, led by the players, is developing a call to action for Saturday evening." Fletch, any insight on how this all came about?
If you could visually see me right now, I'd be clapping. Earlier on the year, when they were speaking about injustice along with sports and how it should be packaged, I was very critical of Detroit City FC because their initial statement they put out seemed very, very soft, considering that Detroit is a city full of mainly black people, not all black people, but high percentage black people.
80%.
And the fact that your city was very soft, I'll say, in its response to how they should handle it really struck me as odd, especially when other surrounding cities like Ann Arbor, whose racial makeup is very different than Detroit's, was basically outright saying, we need to stop police brutality. We need to stop doing this. This is not okay. And I feel that you're one of the two professional teams in the state and you're the premier flagship team of your league, you should make a stronger statement. They came back a week later and made a better statement. But since that point, they've realized we can't make kind of mealy mouth statements. We have to fully get in there and say what we need to say. And the fact that they're taking part of this, even if it's only for one game, maybe two, that's great. It shows that they're taking this seriously. They're showing that we want to do what we can to stop police brutality and stop the treatment from the police towards minority citizens.
And important to note here, too, I would add that City is saying this was led by the players themselves. They made the decision to not play on Saturday.
It normally is when it comes to things like this, but I think the most interesting thing to me that I find really kind of heartwarming is the fact that the team backs it up. It's not just the players doing something and the front office saying, I don't know. Because there's a real situation with the Real Salt Lake of Major League Soccer where the players elected not to play in the Major League game. And the owner went on record with an interview and said that he's so disappointed that he might have to find 50 new players tomorrow. He's thinking about cutting his entire organization because they protested injustice. And that really struck me as odd because you've seen owners and players have difference of opinions and stuff like that. But it's really I want 50 million. It's I want to give you 15 million. Or it's I want, an extra vacation day. And it's I need you to come play. You never really see someone an owner and his team differentiate when it comes to like basic things like should these people's lives actually matter at all. So the fact that the team and the players are walking hand in hand, it's great for me. I really appreciate the fact that like they come together as one to take this issue very seriously.
So what about supporters? What's the temperature of them in a general sense?
100% supporters. I mean supporters like the actual fans, not like people who like a page and comment. 100% of the supporters are like, yes, we're for this. Kind of like in the same way when Detroit City FC said that they would be unable to play their season and that they might not be able to pay for stuff. Supporters were like, keep our money. We understand it's for a greater good. We got it. For this situation, they're like, yep, we would love to see our team play, but also we understand this is way more important than that. We don't need a game. That's 100% fine. Honestly, the funniest part to me has been people who have been like, well, I was a fan of this club, and now that you guys are choosing politics, I'm not going to be a fan anymore. Bye. And I'm like, how are you a fan of the club and you've been there and gone to games and like not seen all these very, very left flags hanging from Northern Guard's like section?
I mean, it's so clear when you go to a DCFC game what the situation is.
They've had like Black Lives Matter flags, as much flack as they get for being very caustic towards people and for some of the chants they make and for the way they react and people talk about their team. When they really get behind something that's like for social justice, whether it's for injustice in terms of police killing minorities, whether it's for that referee who was killed a few years back during a recreational soccer game, etc., they get behind it in full force. So the fact that like everyone was with it is great. And the few people who dissented about it are no longer associated with the organization from the past few years. So like, it's really people saying, we are okay with this. This is our club. We want to see them play, but this is way more important. We'd much rather injustice stop so we can get back to playing. And honestly, not to segue away from it, I find it hindsight being 2020. Kyrie Irving, basketball player for the Brooklyn Nets, when they first announced to be playing basketball in the bubble down in Florida, people were calling him kind of crazy because he just recently made the flat earth comments, and people are like, well, you shouldn't talk at all. But Kyrie Irving said very bluntly, for two reasons, I don't think we should be playing basketball games right now. One, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we don't know whether we're going to be able to contain this or not. Two, we have a lot of racial injustice and other things going on in the country that we should not be distracting ourselves from. Playing basketball is great. It's a job. I love playing basketball. But also, I don't want people to be distracted from what's going on right now. I want them to pay attention to what's happening. And like, as crazy as people called him for his flat earth comment, he's been very prophetic on the other two. I agree that people are taking it seriously enough to say, you know what? It's not just about us. NBA, WNBA, even NHL, MLB, MLS, NISA, whichever sporting league is happening right now, NFL practices, if they're really taking this seriously to walk hand in hand with their organizations, with the fans to do this, that's really encouraging. Where I see we're actually taking like a small step, but a small noticeable step towards trying to rectify this problem.
It dawns on me that now that you're seeing sports leagues, especially some of the major sports leagues, right? Baseball, the NBA, the NFL to a certain degree, although limited there, it's going to put a lot of people in an uncomfortable position. I mean, by those people, I mean those who are opposed to the Black Lives Matter movement and all the protests going on, the people that are critical of that. I think it's going to put them in a really difficult spot because they're the people that are crying the loudest about the need for life to go back to normal and get the economy going back again. And they're, I'm going to wager a guess and say they're overwhelming sports fans as well. Like sports would be one of the big key things that they want to see go back to normal. So for them to not have sports as an outlet and, some of their favorite players speaking up the most loudly about these social justice issues, like it's going to put them in an interesting spot.
As much as I do not like LeBron James because he decimated the Pistons like last golden era of players, as a man and as like an advocate, he's one of the best people currently in the country. And no athlete has gained and also lost the amount of fans and followers that he has for just actively doing the bare minimum of speaking out to say, this is wrong. We should do something about this. Kind of to your point where like, I know people who are like, man, I love LeBron. I love Chris Paul. I love these athletes. In like November of 2019, if you ask them now, they hate them so much because they're making this all about politics and it's not about the sport. And they should just get back to playing the sport so that I can, paraphrasing, distract myself from all the things that are happening bad right now. And like, I understand it's very uncomfortable. As you mentioned, it's uncomfortable for the people who really just want sports to come back to normalcy. It's uncomfortable for me to turn on a television and see a few more minority people shot by a police officer, or to see someone else like Daniel Shaver, a white person killed by a police officer, in such a cruel and unusual fashion. To see that stuff makes me super uncomfortable. So if it's uncomfortable to where we're not doing something and we're going to try to fix it, sure. But if we're just going to like continue to just get back to normal and I don't feel uncomfortable because I get to watch basketball, but it sucks for you, man. If we're going to try to get back to that, I'm not okay with that. Not at all. So the fact that we're stopping now to try to do something, even if it's just a small thing, even if it's just for like a few days or a month or whatever, I appreciate that, because it's reached the tipping point where people understand sports are very powerful. There's a soccer player, Didier Drogba, from the Ivory Coast.
Yep.
The first time they qualified for the World Cup, I think in 2006, Ivory Coast was in the middle of a civil war. Like, people were killing each other in massive bloodshed. They qualified, and he's like, hey, if we get here and we qualify for the World Cup from here, can we put an end to the civil war? And they're like, if you can do that, okay. And then they qualified. And then there's a picture of him and the two different factions shaking hands. He literally stopped the civil war with a sport. That's powerful enough as it is right there. So if sport has that much power somewhere else, and we claim to be the best country in terms of everything, we should have a much greater impact in terms of stopping stuff here. And I think if we actually take it seriously, we can.
I mean, I hope you're right, because as a fan of sports, this has been just so hard to watch, and not having people listen to each other, see the discussions with no nuance or understanding of what's happening out there. And I think for me, what's been tough is that I don't feel as much kinship with the people that I used to. For me, I'm a big baseball fan. That's my jam. But I'll be honest, like, some of the most toxic stuff going on, it's in baseball, and I don't feel like I can be as excited about it because I know the situation out there, and I'm also flummoxed by the comments. It's almost like, they go online and they go, well, I just want the players to dance. I want them to do what I want them to do, but I don't want to give them the respect that they're humans and that there are real things going on out there.
And to your point, to add to that, a friend of mine who's a journalist out in California made a very interesting point that, like, I laughed at. Someone was like, hey, man, for like 1/8 of LeBron James or 1/8 of this person's contract, I'll go out there and play. And I'm like, man, all these players make X amount of money they make, or because in terms of the average human, they're superheroes. They are like supremely talented, athletic beings that for basketball can leap through the air and almost fly half the time. For football, they can run distances that we should not be able to cover in X amount of time as if it's just normal. And they're super strong. Baseball, they can take a small baseball and propel it 450 feet away from them. Or they can throw it over 100 miles per hour. They can throw it faster than someone can look. So, like, no one wants to watch you go out there and struggle at 5'8" to go play a sport. Yeah, you're never going to get paid that much. Like, I don't care how much. I'll take a bag of potato. No one wants to watch you. If they did, you'd be out there doing it right now. So maybe let the people who like have the ability, who have this, if they want to take a time out to say we need to do something better, maybe just let them. They're people. And like, honestly, when I first got into sports, I got to meet some of the Tigers players. And before I met them, I was like, oh my God, these are athletes. They're like amazing. They're like on Mount Olympus, whatever. And yes, they are very big people. They're very strong people. Namely Miguel Cabrera. He likes to shake people's hands too aggressively to like see. And when you're like, okay, stop, he's like, ha ha, funny. But they're all goofy people. Like, I have friends that remind me of Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, Brandon Inge, Miguel Cabrera, Torrey Hunter, etc. I have friends that remind me of people like that. Like, they're just really tall goofballs. They're people as well. So if you try to run them into the ground like they're just machines, they're going to buck back. And right now, this is what they're doing. And I applaud them for it. And as you mentioned, as a sports fan, it's hard. As a sports reporter, it's even harder. I don't have work. I don't get to work if there's no sports. But honestly, I'd rather forfeit the money I'd make from that if we can get some actual change going. If we're not going to get anything going, then maybe I'll consider trying to do something else. But if we're actually trying to make change towards fixing stuff, yeah, I can deal with not working for a month or 2 or 3. Like, it stinks. But if we, at the end of this, if we can get back to like how we were, but we're starting to make stuff be better, yeah, I'm okay with that. I don't know about other people. I can speak for some journalists. I can't speak for all, because some people are like, I don't care, let's just go back to sports. But if we can make change, I'll take a hit in the pocket, because a hit in the pocket now is much better than like the world descending into much further chaos later.
I was thinking about other things to talk about, but I'll be honest, I can't. I mean, that's a really strong statement, Fletch, and I think it's important to note the sacrifice, and we don't realize the power that's within ourselves, that if we're willing to just hit the brake pedal, I think the car will stop. And I think a lot of people are afraid to hit the brake pedal and have been for a long time. So it's definitely stepping out there to do that.
I don't want to get too graphic, but like what you just said makes me think of one last thing before everything gets wrapped up. I think it's Saw 4 or Saw 5, the one that has Megan Good in it. That's why I watched it, because Megan Good was in it. But there's like a scene where like he has 6 people who are all chained up to go do something. And like progressively it gets chopped down from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to the last 2. And they get inside this room where it has this like saw blade. And it's like, you have to get cut and you have to fill up to like, I think 10 pints of blood. And it's like, oh my God, 10 pints of blood for 2 people. They're going to die. Like that's humanly impossible. Then you start to realize like, all the traps that they set, if everyone had just taken a little bit of pain, they all could have survived and been happy. But the fact that they started like getting rid of people to further their own self so they don't get hurt, now you're at the end and like now you both have to get seriously hurt to survive and you probably won't survive. And just taking that thought process and putting it back into the world, yeah, it's going to stink to not have sports. But if we can deal with not having sports now and fix our problems, we can go back to doing other stuff. And you notice all the other countries that people talk about that like we're better than, they're back to try to do stuff regularly because they handled all this stuff. Maybe not in the best way, but they started at least to do stuff to fix things. That's why they could get back. We've done nothing to fix it, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's racial injustice, whether it's, I won't say nothing. We've done very little to fix it, whether it's the pandemic, racial injustice, etc. So you can't have, it's like trying to eat your ice cream before you finish your dinner. If you don't finish your dinner, you don't get ice cream. That's what it is. So we don't get to have our ice cream and our cookies and such until we finish the cabbage and finish the spinach, etc. So like, if we want to get better, we got to actually do better.
Well, Fletcher, we appreciate you using both gory movies and ice cream before dinner to find analogies about our current situation. So good stuff and stay safe out there, man.
Definitely trying to. You too as well.
Well, that'll do it for your Daily Detroit. Jared, it's been a week.
Yes.
That's about all I can say. Before we let you go, as is customary on a Friday, thanks to many people are in order.
To assistant producer and audio editor Cheyenne Nosarini for her help booking folks and editing some segments. Engineer Randy Walker for helping in myriad ways. Fletcher Sharpe, of course, for lending his smarts about sports and, well, everything else. And of course, thanks to you for listening. If you have feedback for the show, you can shoot us an email at dailydetroit@gmail.com, or we have our voicemail line at 313-789-3211. That's 313-789-3211. We always love to hear from you.
And thanks once again to our members on Patreon who help make this show possible. Everyone is great at patreon.com/dailydetroit. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jared Stays. Take care of each other, and we will get through this together. Talk to you Monday.
Also, a new milestone that you used the words flummoxed and myriad in the same episode.
Big words.